show starts in 1 minute. Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family.
Like 9 out of 10 film stars, Raquel Welch uses Lux Beauty Soap.
Well, no, I like to be a woman and a man to be a man, you know.
We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see. We hope you have a wonderful time.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Longhouse, the show for the sensible centrist. Or, sorry, I fumbled it. It's the NPR for the sensible centrist. Ludwig Path, how are you doing?
Yes, I'm doing well, as usual. So, like you said, prior to the stream, this has been an annoying week, I think, for both of us. But hopefully we can get some respite in this podcast.
Yeah, it's just one of those weeks. A lot of things going on, a lot of things going wrong that don't have to go wrong, causing further problems. With us today, we have Liquid Swan. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
We're doing great. And we are going to be mainly talking about an article that you wrote for Praxarchy recently called Exodus. And actually, for anyone listening who haven't at least read some of it, while you're listening to this, you might want to catch up on the article itself. So I'll post it in the chat real quick. And well, we're going to look at the article, but we're also, of course, going to be sort of discussing the challenges and implications of your article.
So, I mean, I think just a few bullet points for context before we jump into it. I mean, as mentioned previously, I've been functioning as the editor for Praxarchy for, I think, 2 months now. And I have a lot of interesting writers writing for the Praxarchy. We had Dissident Nomad on the show with the petrodollar episode, and he'll be coming back, later to discuss other topics like the interventions of the United States. Perhaps we'll have an episode doing Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon. But another one of the most prolific writers that I have on the site is Liquid Swan that we have here, or also going under the name N.D. Wallace Swan on the site. So I think Swan, maybe you'd want to introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about who you are and your writing and so on.
Well, first of all, I have to apologize because I'm Canadian. So that's a lot of my
Get your sorries out of the way.
Yeah, where I originate from. So sorry about that. Hey,
Yeah.
So I was sort of born into a lower middle class family. I ended up getting into the trades because here if you go to university, you end up making no money. So I went to the trades, and I had a kid my first child was quite young. I was 18. So that kind of was an instant red pill, and having to deal with like a woman so often so young was pretty brutal when I was 18, I guess, with the child and also working. But I came from a middle class union background, so my dad was in the union. My mom wanted to be, but she wasn't often, and so I was kind of default leftist, I guess. I still grew up in like a traditional household, and I had a lot of traditional values. I've always been very traditionalist. I wouldn't have called it that in the past, but now that I look back on it, that's basically what it was. Anyways, but when I got into the real world, I started seeing how things were, and I started seeing the scales sort of fell from my eyes, so to speak, and I no longer saw the world as like looking at it as if we can make it ideal. And I started thinking of it as more as like a tragedy that you sort of have to embrace the reality of. And so over time, I started reading and writing. And a while ago, I used to listen to a lot of Carl Benjamin when he was Sargon of Akkad. And then I got into Academic Agent quite a bit. And I say I'm more leaning that direction in the last couple of years. But basically, that got Academic Agent got me into praxeology, which is like Ludwig von Mises and Hayek and stuff. And after reading The Road to Serfdom, that was sort of the final nail in the coffin of the concept of, say, any form of socialism or any form of like state interventionism in some sense. And from there, I've sort of moved on to writing these sort of articles.
But yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, if you have like a middle class, you don't have a formal writing background. So how did you get into writing? Are you sort of self-taught in a sense? You just started writing, or did you have any tutoring?
Well, I was when I was in school, I was in an advanced program, so I was kind of slated for university. But because I had a kid when I was 18, I got pushed into the trades, and then anyways, but my job in the trades is I work and then you kind of wait around and you work and then you wait around. So I have a lot of spare time. And so I filled it up with writing and reading. So basically, essentially self-taught, but I've, learned I've read books on writing and I've taken lessons in certain senses, informally, of course. And I just, at the beginning, I was really bad. Like, I'm kind of still, I don't think I'm great now. I look back on my older stuff and I kind of cringe a bit. I think maybe we all do that. But I just try to improve.
The way of things.
Yeah, I just try to improve.
You haven't progressed, right? Isn't that the saying?
Exactly. I look back and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that, But that's just part of life. Oh, I'm also very well traveled. Well, I don't know if you'd say I'm well traveled, but I've been to Russia. I've been to Iceland, Sweden, Brazil, Mexico, quite a bit of the United States. I went to the UK and Sweden this last summer/fall, and I have friends from many different places like Romania, South Africa, Germany, and the Netherlands, as well as obviously Canada. So I'm I don't know if I'm well traveled, but I seem to have a diversity of experiences, so to speak. So that's definitely influenced how I view the world and how I write.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you have a lot of good articles on the Praxarchy. I mean, you have the series on authoring the Caesar. That's your series on Kaiserism. That's it's on there and it's been transcribed to YouTube as well for those of you who just want to listen to it. I think it goes for about an hour. You can sit and listen through all 4 of your articles on Kaiserism. But today we're here to talk about your latest article. It's just called Exodus. And maybe you should introduce the audience to the concept, because I think it's something that many people have thought of, but they haven't taken it seriously.
Well, the concept kind of came from this because my wife's from Brazil, and she's a white woman from Brazil. And what I found when I was there is that it's kind of like going back to the first time I went to Brazil. I was like, well, this is like being in the 1950s. Not the technology, but like just the people's attitudes. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, but it definitely is different. And when I started learning more about Brazil, obviously, because I didn't really know much about it, I learned that they have sort of a history of pluralism. There's a lot of communities there that from other places in the world where they've left, say, Ukraine, like 100 years ago. And now they have this like town in Brazil that's like pretty it's flourishing, and they have like a flourishing Ukrainian culture, and they have their own language, and it's sort of in Brazil, and they sort of exist there, and no one bugs them. So and there's all sorts of this stuff. Like in the south of Brazil, it's very German. A lot of like northern Italian communities there, and they sort of just get left alone. Even the Confederates, I mentioned in the article, a bunch of 20,000 Confederates left to Brazil at the end of the Civil War. I think about half of them stayed, but they played a major role, and they kind of take pride in their history in Brazil. They don't do any of this, all the sort of trans kid stuff and all that other stuff, like they don't fuck with that. Like they don't let that stuff happen.
So do you think that's because they're like behind the times on globalization? Like the United States just hasn't gotten that far yet, and you think it will come in the future? Do you think they have like maybe some like hardwired defenses to the stuff that the let's say the Anglospheres and like the Western spheres don't have?
Well, one of the things about Brazil is like they have very low, I want to say low cultural self-confidence. They feel like they're irrelevant, and they're always trying to chase relevancy. Which I think is, I think it's kind of true. A lot of people do see like South America as sort of like the, it's there, but no one really knows what's going on there. Just crazy soccer fans.
It's even it penetrates the online. Every time someone mentions Brazil, you get a bunch of comments for people who are like, "Oh, Brazil got mentioned. Hello, please come to Brazil." Is the joke for like under every like banned account online. Yeah,
and it seems like Brazilians prefer foreigners to other Brazilians. So I don't know what the deal is with that, but that's definitely a trend there. What was I trying to get to here with the?
Well, you were outlining sort of how you came to the ideas in your article.
Oh yeah, okay. Then here's another thing: is with going to Brazil, you see like where I live in Canada, like a house costs $1 million, and it's like not good. It's not a good house. It's cold here. Everything's expensive. The taxes are high. You go to Brazil, your taxes are like $100 a year. You get a palatial mansion, and it costs you like $250,000. You got like a pool and it's warm, enough land to like grow food. And so just from that alone, I was like, I kind of started thinking about it, and also they kind of want Europeans there, which is, you don't find that in a lot of places. I feel personally, I feel unwelcome in Canada a lot of the time, just because of, and it's weird because it's still mostly European in Canada, but it's less and less so, and all the pressures are pushing against that.
Right.
Yeah. But so I mean, moving back a little bit, because you talk about Brazil and South America in the article, but you also talk about a couple of other places. But maybe we should just try to take the core thesis as you see it. Like from what I understand, you're trying to make the case that if let's say if dissident communities actually want to thrive, it's going to be very difficult to do that, staying in this kind of what we call like the gay sphere in a sense.
Oh yeah.
We have a much better shot at creating a thriving community by consolidating and moving somewhere else to start over. Is that correct?
I think I see nothing wrong with the struggle in the homelands. I think that's extremely honorable. But I hope that it's successful. But the problem is, what if it isn't? There's no backup plan. Now, if you're talking about immigrants from other countries that go to the West, if the West fails, they have a backup plan. They can go home. We can't. So what do we do if all else fails? So I see my article more as a proposition to have a backup plan, because we don't have a backup plan.
Yes, and the details you outlined there would be, the rounding up friends and family of the base variety, and trying our luck somewhere else, really. And South America was one you mentioned.
Yeah, there's a couple others, but
there was Eastern Siberia and Polynesia, I think, was mentioned.
And you ran a poll, right?
I ran a poll, yes, on my community tab. Let me just bring up the results here, just for fun. We'll see what the community thinks. Here we go. So I wrote I don't know if you can see this. The West has fallen, and you have determined no hope remains for rebuilding a civilization in your current country. You assembled up to about 100 of your base friends and family in preparation for an exodus to a place where you can escape the GAE and rebuild a base society. Of the listed geographical areas, where do you go and why? Comment other below. And so, of the chosen one, South America was the clear winner. Eastern Siberia, which I saw as a bit of a, even from your article, is a bit of a dark horse.
Yeah.
It's probably the most unstable of the three. But it might also shield you the most from the GAE. So there's that. And we'll just read some comments real quick. The Prudentialist says, wherever the largest R1B diaspora is. R1B, the haplogroup would be Europeans, isn't it?
Yeah.
Roughly, yeah. It may be harsh to... NATO Tomato says it may be harsh to live in Siberia, but the extreme cold is a repellent for mass immigration and foreign influences, just like the little tribes that live across Siberia today, which kept their identity despite being part of the communist Soviet Union. Coney Current Year says independent Western Cape. Holfjord says something that I cannot read, but it might be Polynesian for all I know.
I thought it looked like Hyperborea or something when I'm reading it.
Maybe
if you squint a little bit, maybe if he's in the chat, he can correct us.
Yeah. Mayor of Napier says, I'm in New Zealand and I'd stay here, which sort of, failed to answer the question, I think. Kotor says, South America, whoever chose that has no idea what it's like. Seems like he speaks from experience. But
well, there are problems there, for sure.
I think you touched on that. I mean, your perspective would specifically be a, quote unquote Westerner setting up shop in South America. It wouldn't be, what is life like for some, working class guy in Brazil.
Yeah, like that at worst, I would be at worst comes to worst in that situation. You'd be looking at places like, Curitiba. That'd be like the worst case scenario. And Curitiba is basically like a Western European city. So,
right,
for the most part.
David Labaril says, why escaping? I would never waste my opportunity to become a warlord, so I stay here and I search for weapons. And then Martinez Capella says, but what if you did have breakfast? Scroto's channel says, I am in Chile. I'm not sure what that's supposed to communicate, but there you go. JC Denton says, Southern Brazil has a large population of Confederate state descendants who left after the war. Kay seems to correct him here. So I'm not sure what the real reality is of the Confederates in Southern Brazil. Martinez Capella says, you misspelled Hyperborea. Let's see. Javier Olivia says, South America because it has America in the name. It's right there. Seriously, though, those people aren't afraid of a little military coup every now and then. Also, look up videos of modern Chilean military parades, snappy uniforms, access to natural resources. Embryo selection will see parts of South America start to look like Swedes, while selecting for blonde hair and blue eyes will likely be outlawed in the US. So yeah, in the future, the Brazilians will be whiter than the Americans.
Well, rich Brazilian women will buy blonde, blue-eyed sperm for like $1,000 a pop.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that South America in general is sort of this place people go for to do more of this kind of risque or experimental biotech things, like stem cell treatments and so on. So yeah, it does check out.
Carl says South America is the only one of these with arable land, although Kamchatka does have its advantages.
Except for the
Mr.
volcanoes.
Patriarch says probably South Africa. It can be gnarly, but I got friends and family there, and many Westerners in South Africa are used to living in the collapse at this point. Great Trek 2.0. I'd probably set up outside a nice small town on the west coast, fortify it, network with the Afrikaner and colored locals. That is something you didn't mention in the article. Is that because you assume sort of that South Africa is already gone, in a sense?
I consider it too dangerous for
fair enough.
Our progeny.
There's too many eyes on it, I guess.
Yeah.
Assuming
it was
China...
like the first.
Sorry.
It was like the first sort of diversity, inclusion country.
Yeah. Bird Turd Meme says, assuming China doesn't invade Eastern Siberia, however, if it's viable, I'd choose Mars. Antarctic Dome is the only hope. We can only dream, Adam Drew. Northern Observer says you need to fight where you are, even in San Francisco and Chicago. Praise.
I do agree. I do agree with that to some degree. But again, what if you lose? That's all I have to say.
Praise Keck says you will never be home until you find yourself right here. Montana is just as good as any other. It's -14 here today, and it keeps the short-term paradigm people away. When the world falls into the flames, we will rise again. One of the Pathalma says Kurgulan. What is this?
Scythia.
Ah, okay. Well, about the Montana thing, I mean, yes and no, and it's let's assume you said that your article I think says 8 years from now, things are pretty much collapsing, right?
Oh, I just said it's current year plus 8. Like, do you remember Justin Trudeau said it's 2015?
Yeah.
So it's 2015 plus 8. That's all.
Oh, because it's okay. It's current year plus 8, so it's today. Okay, never mind.
It's like saying,
but
like,
if we envision, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
If we envision a future where sort of the infrastructure is slowly collapsing, pretty much, or did you envision a future where things are just in a slow decline, and anyone who sort of looks at the regime the wrong way just gets taken out back? What are the parameters to trigger the exodus in your view?
Well, my parameters would be if you can find an economic opportunity on that side of things, and it's safer for your children, and you can develop your own, you can keep your ideas and your culture alive instead of being devoured by the gay, the greater American empire and global homogeneity. If you can do those things, then that's preferable, and you can do that at any time. But
that's fair. Yeah.
But I do see things as, I don't think things will collapse quickly. I think it's going to be like a slow decline. It'll look. In fact, I'm writing a new article now about interregnum, and I think we are sort of in a stage of interregnum right now. And the base concept for that idea is that there's a period, you have sort of like a regnum, obviously, would be like a period of law and order, and interregnum would be when law and order is could be there. It's like a simulacra of law and order, but really it's just whoever's in power just uses that power for themselves, and they favor their friends and they punish their enemies. And maybe that's always the case.
Francis is a narco-tyranny, kind of.
Yeah. So it's not really law and order. It's just a period of what it's like they're faking it till they make it, I guess. And I see that here, like with our paper constitutions and our quote rights, just like taken away, like nothing. Well, that means there's nothing backing them up, which means they're just bullshit, right?
Well, I think with your idea of the interregnum sort of being like a middle point, and it's not fully collapsing, it's not full tyranny, it's just sort of middle ground, because everyone can see like some trouble on the horizon. It flows into some of the. I wrote an article that Luddic Path posted on Praxarchy today, I think, and tackling a bit of the idea of, there's been some pushback on woke stuff lately, kind of because if we're going to keep hobbling along with this regime, it kind of has to, because the myths and the stories that are replacing our current ones are causing the bridges to collapse and the trains to derail, right? So there's going to be this weird sort of like, it's going to return to, what is it, the Fresh Prince, but not really. It's going to be this weird middle kind or middle ground that's just going to keep us going for a little longer. So it's not a full collapse. It's just, as you said, like a comfortably numb decline.
Yeah. And I think during like such a decline, like I mentioned in the article a bit, that like you're sort of always at risk, because you could step out of line. Like, so at some point you'll need to step up and say something, or you'll be, like, say, spiritually destroyed, and they're going to constantly kind of search you out for that. And I think, and their power is mostly like reputation destruction, economic sanctions, sort of stuff. But they will resort to kinetic action. And not that I support, like, I disavow, for YouTube's sake, kinetic action, but eventually that's sort of what you get cornered to doing.
Mm.
So
that's something I wanted to ask you, because in your article, maybe we'll get to this a bit more later, but your idea of the article is that you have this organization in terms of a certain amount of people who think like you do and have the same goal, and you do the exodus, you do a move to one of these countries with the explicit sort of mission of ensuring the survival of these ideas and these morals. But you also talk about how the goal should be to sort of I'm trying to put this in a way that's not going to get us into trouble with YouTube, because the tactic is very reminiscent of another group's tactic in terms of inserting ourselves into the power structure and using fierce friend-enemy distinctions and favoring our own in-groups, etc., etc.
Let's call them the Swedes.
The Swedes, yes, the Swedes who have been, removed from many a nation.
Well, that's sort of like one of the ideas of it, is that you sort of have to become the Swedes in that area.
Right. First of all, there's the idea of the locals objecting to this. Second of all, in the spirit of, I suppose, no exit, what's stopping the Swedes of the GAE from calling us out as terrorist groups and making life hard for us?
Well, one of the benefits of, like, going to one of these far off areas is that the Swedes don't really have a lot of influence.
Well, I mean, through the United States Armed Forces, they might, right?
They may, but I think because it would be such a small cohort, so to speak, of our Swedes, I don't think the GAE Swedes would even notice. At least that's the hope.
Yeah.
They can't notice us. They don't always notice us now. So, if we're on a totally other continent, sort of in the middle of the wilderness, so to speak, I think you are going to be less notable, for at least until you get big enough where you can kind of raise a stink, so to speak, where you're self-reliant.
Because I think places like South America and Africa and so on, I mean, it is places that the GAE tends to not give that much of a shit about, because they're not considered consolidated geopolitical, powers, in a sense. They don't really pose any threat to the United States in any meaningful way. So for good or for bad, they tend to just kind of leave them alone and not spend any resources on them. So I can see that that perspective.
Right. Do we want to bring up some more stuff from the article or read from, or do you have any other? We sort of jumped ahead a bit here because we were talking about the needs for leaving our countries and seeking out these different areas.
Well, I've had this idea kind of rolling around my head for like a number of years. I didn't think of. I talked about it with my wife a lot. She's from Brazil. And she kind of get points. I've like polished it over time, because I was like, okay, what about this? And she's like, no, for this reason, no. And so then I think about it more. And over the years, I've kind of polished it a bit. But when that latest discussion between Carl Benjamin and Peter Hitchens, that's what sort of like got me to think about writing something about it. I was like, well, I might as well get this on paper, and that's basically where it came. That's why I put it down instead of just leading
Because
out in my head.
Hitchens was the one in that argument who advocated for Exodus, if I recall.
Yeah. So with this article, I'm trying to kind of navigate between the two, because I do agree with Carl. You have to kind of, it's honorable and it's the right thing to do to stand and fight as best you can. But then Peter Hitchens has a point too, which is like, well, there might be better places out there, you know? And if you stand and fight and lose, well, then there's nothing. So let's say, for example, everyone stands and fights, but also there's a small cohort that goes off and creates a Novo Hyperborea. And so they lose, but then they can come to Nova Hyperborea, and then you have a place for them. They're not just going to be destroyed or absorbed, or like their essence sort of gets absorbed into Nova Hyperborea instead of being like donated to the GAE, because that's sort of the option, right? If you lose, if you win, good, even better.
Right. Do you have any comments, Ludicpath, or should we?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many places that we could go with this, right? So I'm not sure. I mean, because we've been talking a lot. Sorry,
I
wanted talking a lot
to
about South America, but you do mention 2 other places as well, which was maybe you could speak a little bit about, say, the Eastern Siberia and Polynesia, like what advantages those places have, say, in contrast to South America.
Well, I did go into a little bit of the article, but in like Polynesia, for example. There's a lot of basic resources. You don't get stuff like oil there very often, minerals and stuff. But you'd have a happy, warm life with tasty food and nice weather. But the locals there aren't very welcoming to permanent residents. They like tourists because it brings money, and that means they can have more fun time in the sun. But they're not very friendly to permanent migrants, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's all. There are places though in Polynesia that are like basically either abandoned or will be completely abandoned. Like the Pitcairn Islands, almost everyone on that island is like 60 plus. It's part of the British Empire still, or it's a British overseas territory. I think in 4 decades, I think it'll be completely empty. And there's sort of like a little town there. I wouldn't want to move there because it's very, very isolated. But it's an interesting idea.
It is, and I wanted to because one thing is sort of the location, and I think that's it's interesting, but it can also be a bit of a red herring because you can get lost in just arguing about the locations, which don't get me wrong, they're important, but in terms of a thought experiment, the location isn't very important, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So I wanted to take some time and just sort of read from the article when you talk about the development and the other things that I touched on earlier about, okay, so we've figured out a place to go. What do we do when we get there? Is that okay? I can just read from I think it's development and onward, and we can discuss the topics.
Yeah, for sure.
Go ahead.
I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. With time as a community, we will work to take over the enforcement positions and those of local political power by putting our own people in charge. It doesn't matter if forces of the state are present, only that our friends and kin control them. This in turn brings a new number of advantages for our progeny by existing in the marches of these nations. Given the proximity to these borders, it is only a quick hop to another of the countries. If we organize, this creates an opportunity for access, monopolization, and the benefits that would bring to our group. By holding the levers, we can enforce disadvantageous state policy upon others while selectively choosing not to do so for our friends. As an organized minority, we will have a strong foothold as a result, and can turn the yoke of the state in on itself. This would have to be below the waterline to avoid the ire of the host nation, but wouldn't require much organizing outside of typical nepotism and bribes of favored locals. Now, that is the big one, I think. Can you pull off the subversion required to basically flip a nation, however small, or a local community or whatever, right?
I think the local community thing is like, it's basically and inevitability, as long as you're organized, because they're not.
As long as
So
you have the
that's
nepotism, as long as you have the tribal preferences that trumps
yeah. As long as
the
you're full,
locals.
if you go full Swede, there's no losing.
Right. I mean, in theory, that's true. I'm a bit hesitant to say that it's a foolproof plan, but it's I know
It's,
that it's worked before. Let's put it like that.
it's less of a plan and more of a strategy.
Yeah.
Like, you know, maybe.
But as I said, we've seen it work before, so.
Yeah. You can always marry someone in your family or maybe you get someone to marry a local that is like the mayor's son or something, and then you just kind of work your way. There's lots of different ways to do it, and some of it will just be natural. But it's all about, even if it's natural, you still got to kind of keep the reins on it, so to speak.
Yeah, and you would have to keep the reins on every sort of, at least in the first generation and probably the second as well. It's going to require quite tight organization.
Yeah.
From the migrant group.
Well, let's say you start like a logging company, because it's in the middle of nowhere. There's lots of trees.
Yep.
Start a logging company. You hire some locals. You get their favor because they're your employer, or sorry, they're your employee, right?
Yeah.
And there's a huge they have a shortage of jobs in this area, so just from that alone, you're going to slowly get influence in that area.
Yeah.
But yeah, we better show up with some capital then, right?
Yeah, for
Bitcoin, sure. Bitcoin won't cut it. NFTs won't cut it. Like, we have to have actual money to buy capital for these jobs, because if you don't, and you mentioned this in the article as well, like, you need cash for bribes. I mean, in South America, they're not as consolidated. The institutions are a lot more corrupt, which is good for one reason, that you can actually bribe people and get out of situations that way. So it's a bit, the sword cuts both ways there. But yeah, you can't show up there poor unless then at least you have to have like a highly skilled population that they can put, have some very in demand skill that they could use there.
We'd have to start businesses. Like, we'd have to start our own commerce. But the thing is, there's opportunity there where there's, say, less so here. And also, they'll give you, the government will like incentivize this, and in places like Canada, you're going to be punished for, let's say, quote, ruining the environment, which maybe just needs managing a forest. So in Brazil, they'll like allow this because they're more realistic in that sense. Like, they just don't want to be poor anymore, so they're sort of willing to help. So there is that advantage.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, moving on. We could hide our entire scheme in plain sight, as we will have our own language, culture, and methods separate from the outsiders. The fear is always that we will be absorbed, but through encouragement of intra-tribe marriage, incentives like dowry, and expanded familial networks, this becomes less likely, as life will be easier than rolling the dice even with friendly locals. I think we covered a lot of this already, but yes.
To expand on that, like, your employees, if you have a company, sort of become part of your family. They can sort of become part of your tribe in a sense. So,
right.
and you can select them based on your preferences.
Yeah, they become honorary Swedes, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And they'll
they get to marry one of your daughters and move to the village. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they'll and hopefully in that sense, they'll give them sort of an advantage, and that will, like, for a comparison to the regular locals, and that'll grow the influence of of the Swedish community.
Right. The nature of the family will need to be fully restored to a point before liberalism, or those same poisons will destroy us too. Finding a way out of the fiat-based inflationary currency system would also be a great way to maintain independence and wealth. Using our own currency would help us avoid the taxman for our intra-tribal exchange. Cryptocurrency is an option, as is hard currency, metals. If we can create a market for our own goods in the outside world, we could offer discounts to outsiders who pay us in our currency, which would make it difficult for the taxman to trace and tax us, while creating demand for our own money, which should also be slowly deflationary. It would then be both possible and stable for us to import outside goods. If done dutifully, our standard of living will eventually be much higher than that of the host nation. The success will be our own. Any outsider who would claim credit for our success is a liar. Ideally, we will do the work ourselves, and if we hire local labor, we should ideally pay them above the normal wages so they cannot later claim we took advantage of them, a common resentment-based complaint. So there's two things here: the family, which we touched on a little bit, but of course the economics and the financial decisions here.
So one thing that the host nation would probably like to do is, okay, we make a town and then we start trading stuff, and then they're like, oh yeah, there's sales tax on all those exchanges. Well, they can only sales tax you on stuff that's in their currency. So if you have your own, then you avoid that. But that takes a lot of in-group trust.
It does, and it's another one because then you're one level up. You not only have to convince the locals that you're not dangerous. You have to sort of, as you said, you have to convince the taxman as well that you're not going to be belligerent, basically, like economically speaking.
Yeah.
And then by extension the state, because I mean if someone just shows up in your country and then starts doing stuff and refuse to pay taxes because they have their own weird currency, I don't know, it's gonna be rough.
It's gonna be difficult, yeah. But you have to. That's one of the reasons why I suggested the marches of those countries, because it's going to be less likely that the central government is going to have influence there.
Right.
And also, another advantage of being on the border is, well, you can just hop over the other side.
Yeah. Fjolnir for 3,000 Icelandic kroner. Thank you so much. Says, to the Fremen, the fight for survival had long dominated their cultural identity. The brutal environment of Arrakis necessitated the frugal use of energy and resources, especially water. We must become Fremen, not Swedes. What do you think about that?
I mean, it is important to remain strong. But it's also not like the Fremen weren't really flourishing as a civilization, were they?
I don't think so. No.
They were kind of struggling.
Show me some Fremen high culture. I'm not sure it exists.
I mean, there's honor in it, but
No, but it's I guess that it brushes on like a larger, point of discussion, which would be the comfort and high culture versus strength, in terms of both physically and mentally, right? As a society.
Well, that being said, we could always move to I don't know, where the Sami live and just live like them.
Yeah, that worked out great.
Yeah, be Eskimos or become Middle Easterners, basically. We live in some of the harshest environments, and all of the energy is used to survival. And of course, they'll leave us alone, but there's a good reason.
The white
for them
Taliban.
To leave us alone.
Yeah. Coney Current Year says, for £5, thank you. My choice for Exodus is the Western Cape in South Africa. The WC is very seriously considering the option of seceding from South Africa in the near future.
Well, all I have to say to that is do it. But, just if they do it, I'll go there.
Big if true. Let's put it like that. The Fremen did breed the warriors that raced the galaxy, though. Well, that's true. I don't have like Dune lore baked into me, unfortunately. There's a lot going on in the chat. Leo says, anti-Swedish rhetoric will not be accepted. No, the eternal Swede is always a danger. They tried to subvert our paintings this past weekend, and I will not have any more Swedish influence in my nation. Okay. Well, it's Julius Flavius says the Fremen conquered the universe strong as hell, not soft. Well, that's the thing. You can you can you can be strategic and not soft. Isn't that possible? Maybe it isn't. I'm posing the question here.
Well, that's sort of a lion versus fox sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
But
I don't know.
I guess you're arguing for foxy tactics. Would you say that?
I'm kind of arguing for a diversity of tactics. So you want to have. That's why I'm saying, like, if the lions lose, then you kind of you got to become a fox, or there's just nothing. So
Yeah.
and maybe when you fox it out over in South America for a while, you build up some lions out of necessity, because it will be harsher than living in
for
like London.
everyone listening and for your sake, Liquid Swan, I don't want people to misunderstand you. What you're saying is that it's not either or. This is one possibility.
It's like in addition to the honorable fight to the death, also escape and have a place to call home if a backup plan, essentially.
So for this paragraph, I understand what you're putting forward. I think pulling it off is extremely difficult.
Oh yeah, definitely. This paragraph was more of just kind of a thinking out loud sort of thing to get the idea of what can we do to take advantage of our position. Basically, to be what can we do as Swedes, right, in the host nation. And I think I was just kind of thinking out loud with that. I don't know the parameters
Well, the
of how to
question
even
is,
pull that off.
Let me add to the pile of analogies here or metaphors, because some people are saying that I think what they disagree with is the Swedish tactics here. But something like the Amish seem to have sort of kind of tried to retain their strength, right, while living in a host nation. Would this be? I was the one who brought up the Swedishness of this. Would you say that this would actually be more Amish-esque than?
I'd say it's Amish with Swedish characteristics.
Yeah, fair enough. All right.
But I mean, the Amish are pacifists, right? I don't think that's what the chat is having in mind.
Well, I meant in terms of like strength of unity and God. Okay, we're gonna have to do like this is gonna be pile and pile of analogies. It's gonna be like Amish warrior tribe with Swedish with Swedish characteristics. Is that what we're arguing for?
Oh yeah, maybe a little bit.
I don't know. It's getting weird. And let's just go back to the idea of the Swedes here. I'm gonna keep reading about that. Another option would be to buy an existing village or a small town and work from there to take advantage of its existing infrastructure. This would be the fastest way to start and is not much more expensive than starting from scratch. If a town is too large, buying up one of the neighborhoods and building a sort of wall around it is a good option. And over time, we could race our own into the local elite positions. Defensive measures will be paramount regardless of choice of location. But how would this be accomplished sustainably? This one as well, I feel, is a very risky tactic.
Well, so have you ever seen that movie Cidade de Deus? It's like City of God. Okay, so it's a movie about. Okay, so if you know, it's a movie about this area in Rio de Janeiro on the west side, where they moved all the poor people, or a lot of them, because they were building these shanty towns that they end up still existing because they didn't build enough housing for these poor guys in the city. They call it the City of God to sort of incentivize these people to go, and basically, you kind of the concept here, instead of being a city of God, quote city of God filled with a bunch of vagrant homeless laborers, it'd be like a city of God filled with sensible centrists doing Amish Swedish tactics, and so you'd be kind of protected. Like I've been to the city of God in Rio, and it's crazy. It looks worse than the movie, but they have their own community there, and you don't go in. You don't cross that line, because if you do, you don't know what's going to happen. You're going into a whole nother world, their world, right?
I
So
just
that's kind
feel
of
like it's it's an equal and opposite reaction thing where if we do something this extreme, the locals are gonna be just as extreme back to us.
well, you'd have to do it. You wouldn't do it in a way that like made the locals feel bad. You do it in a way that would be like a productive center of whatever
All right.
you guys do. It wouldn't be like aggressive. The point is to just maintain your own security, because in certain places there's no
Are you
security.
guys using this, and we're just gonna? All right. I understand what you're saying. I'm really just feeling maybe I don't have knowledge of South America and how life is on the ground.
Well, like
I
my
just don't
mother-in-law.
see. I just don't see how this is going to pan out without our guys being shot in the street pretty much by people who are mad that we're taking over their city.
Oh, that's yeah. Well, we would. My goal would be, if we were looking like we're taking over the city, then we've done it wrong, essentially.
Okay.
So I don't know how that would necessarily be done, but that's why I'm thinking like I wouldn't be in the middle of their city.
So it would like this. It would be like the mid-century Swedish ghettos of Berlin. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe, yeah.
Just butting in here. I mean, my concern, and this is something that hasn't come up because we've been talking about. Okay, you have like these Latin American governments, and then you have the rabble on the street, essentially the people who run around hungry and they're just going to shoot you because they don't like foreigners and so on. But like, there's a third thing that is really like the organized crime groups that become sort of these de facto governments in a lot of these places. And that would be my biggest concern with Latin America, is that you'd have to deal with like these organized mafias that sort of turn into de facto governments in a sense, and try to not, because what I imagine, if they notice somebody moving in and putting up industry, they would just start charging you, for protection racket money or something like that. And how exactly can you be able to thrive or figure out how to navigate that situation? I don't know if you're familiar with
Oh yeah, I am.
or that's something you've thought about.
Yeah, the Red Command and all that stuff. That's mostly in the cities, like the big cities like Rio, Sao Paulo, like Natal. If you're out in the rural areas, this isn't a thing. Like they maybe travel through those areas, and they might maybe have like they're making drugs or whatever in one of the forests. They just don't go there. Go to a different one. In the south, this is very not a problem. It's mostly in like Sao Paulo and north. You get these. Where I'm thinking, more near the Argentinian or Guayan border, there's just nothing there except for like a small border town that basically is employed to facilitate trade across the border. That's about it. There's like 5,000 people in like a town like Bar da Carai, and there's going to be no gangs in that town. The gang will be the police, but you can infiltrate that. And we don't even have to have a town like that. We could just make our own little village further away, and there's going to be nothing bothering you. They don't have any interest. You're nothing to them. Now, in Rio,
Right.
for sure, in Rio, you're going to be competing against gangs, but in the rural areas, there's nothing. Oh,
I'll have to take your word for it.
And not only that, but like southern Brazil and like Uruguay, they're basically, they're not much different than say southern Europe, and in some cases like Germany, because they're full of Southern Europeans and Germans.
Right. Herlock Sholmes says, I'm not sure if anyone here can answer this. It says, question, opinion on Irania and South Africa. You didn't already
Well, I think it's
mention it.
awesome. I think it's awesome. It's like, do you know about it?
No, I have no idea what that is.
So it's a town in, I think, central northwest South Africa, and it's called Orania, and there's only a couple thousand people there, but it's basically a Swede, I don't know, not Swedes only town, an Amish only town, let's say.
Oh, it's an Afrikaner town.
Exactly, yeah.
Basically, yeah. Okay. So it's a separatist town. Okay, interesting. And Peregrinus de Flandria says, don't they have like a weird German enclave in Paraguay or something?
Yep, they do.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Fjolnir says, I think one of the best places for a dissident exodus would be the West Fjords of Iceland. Almost no people there, and an environment harsh enough not to make you soft. That is certainly, I guess, a viable alternative. I guess it doesn't have to be, done in this specific way, does it?
Iceland's, I've been there. It's pretty woke, depending on where you are. The rural people, the thing is, they're kind of like the rural Swedes. The rural Swedes are not woke at all, but their government seems to
it's
be.
the same here. So,
yeah.
I guess it's the same everywhere, really, almost.
Like when I traveled to Kalmar, Sweden, which is like the southeast, because I have my great grandfather was from there, so I did some genetic stuff and I matched with my cousin and I went and stayed with them for like a week. It was really awesome.
Right.
But they're super conservative. They call themselves far right, but really they're just they're probably like conservatives in Canada, which is basically liberal. But compared to their government, like they're very very conservative.
Yeah.
Actually, I wish I could say, but some of the things my cousin was saying were pretty out there, very based. But
Vingel says, I've seen an interview with a German in Paraguay, hella racist, but he had a native waifu. I think that is the way. This is the way of the racist. Let's see here. It was something I wanted to bring up, but maybe I lost it. Okay, never mind. I'm going to keep on reading for a bit.
Yep.
Order. I must preface by saying all of this is speculative, open to criticism, and is meant to just get us thinking about this topic and generate better ideas. Perhaps it is just an exercise to reflect upon our current paradigm. We must consider the structure of power for long-term stability. History demonstrates that the longest-lived systems had a feudal character, or what H.H. Hoppe refers to as private government. Even Republican city-states like Venice, Florence, and Milan were run by an oligarchy controlled by merchant families. Both forms survive to this day, though depleted by the global homo insistence of democracy. And I think that is very important for people in chat to remember that, this thing sounds kind of far out, but if we're facing an uncertain future, we have to be prepared to do everything in our power to survive. And for some, that might be staying and fighting, and for others, that might be, the retreat and the heroic return. I remember listening a bit to a cigar stream the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this sounds that far out at all, to be honest. I mean, I almost have to applaud Liquid here, because he's done more work in actually trying to outline these ideas and looking at places that we could actually live, where there are opportunities and that are strategic for us long term. Even though like some of this stuff might seem far fetched, it's I think it's much better than most of what I've seen.
Yeah, I'd agree. Under a city-state oligarchy, it takes a complex arrangement of interconnectivity, loyalty, and organization to maintain a systemic balance. Under a feudal barony, there is one node of power in the baron, though he would require a council of ministers, including a religious leader, the head of the local church, holding significant power that the baron would have to respect. This is unrelated to the false and failed idea of the separation of powers. Instead, it is related to the division of labor. There is always the option of theocracy. However, this sort of government tends to delay the development of infrastructure, as the focus moves too far away from the material world, resulting in destruction of our progeny, either by their rejection of such systems or physical provision due to overfocusing on immateriality. I believe that history shows the requirement of both, at minimum material and ecclesiastical elements. The priests of the barony would be wholly focused on his position, but he should also maintain a family. There are reasons for this, the first being the need to build up a society that he might have a son to inherit his position. This may not be allowed under some religious sects.
I just want to add on that ecclesiastical element thing. I never used to think that was the case, but then I read this book of poems from the medieval era called the Carmina Burana, if you're familiar.
I think I've heard the name, yes.
There's a song, O Fortuna, that comes from it.
Yeah.
But if you read it, it's basically a bunch of lessons that it's all in Latin. I read the translated version. But it was just this German princes that kind of were putting this together to basically pass down to the next generations because they're worried that this knowledge would be lost.
Right.
And in some sense, I think that's very true even today. Like with a lot of the stuff
that's certainly something that we can learn from, and that is part of it, and for everyone listening, that is something that that is also an avenue of survival, right? If we get wiped out totally, then nothing survives, right? If we manage to spread out in nodes, if worst comes to worst, at least those nodes will be able to continue as much as possible of the tradition.
Mm-hmm. Just like the Swedes.
Like the Swedes. Another goal should be to create an order that would make up a monastery of sort, where young men can push themselves to higher principles. Monks, unquote, would be a mixture of warriors and priests, and from them a large number of our future leaders will be selected. Is this Lambda's project?
I actually talked to Lambda about this. I was like, "Hey, Lambda, yeah, he read the article, and he said it was interesting. This is before it was published. I sent to him. I was like,
right.
I was like, if this happens, we'll need people like him.
Yeah.
And he says he's more into fighting the good fight on the ground as it is now, creating a exodus in our minds, so to speak, within the current paradigm. So respect to that, but it will be important to have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the favored type of government, I think in this case we're just gonna have to do whatever works. I really think you're going to run into a wall here if you come into it thinking that we're gonna have this type of feudalism or this type of theocracy moving in there. Like I think that the environment is going to impose certain parameters in terms of what will and will not work, and also the people, because that's going to be a big factor. I mean, assembling, say, 150 people who are willing to do this, right? It will just be, I think, just a loose collection of dissidents, unless you're suggesting that you have some kind of like Protestant community from the United States or some Canadian Catholic community or something that can just be directly put in there. But I imagine that this would have been like, I mean, if you're pitching this in this sphere, it will be a much kind of broader collection of people with different beliefs, and if you're going to be able to enforce some kind of like strict theocracy on that group, I mean, that's sort of my issue here, is I keep thinking about like the people, how they're going to try to adapt and move away from this kind of standard first world lifestyle in a sense, and adapt to it. And I think if you try to just force on some very like traditional style of government, it'll just be rejected, especially by like the younger generations. They'll just try to kick that off them immediately and join the locals in whatever they're doing. I don't know if that's something you've thought about.
Well, I thought about like the idea about like the religious sect or whatever. I don't really, to me, it doesn't matter what the sect would be. Whatever the community decided, I would just convert to. I don't really care. I just care about the community. So I got that idea from Iceland, actually, strangely enough, when the king of Norway was basically like, "Hey, you guys got to be Christian or we're gonna come and conquer you," or whatever. That was kind of like the underlying words, right? And then so they had this. They went to Thingvellir and had their all thingy, their parliament, and they asked the head pagan priest to basically decide for all of Iceland what they should do: stay pagan or go Christian. And so he laid under a blanket for 3 days or something, if I remember the story right. And after 3 days, he said we should convert to Christianity, but still do the pagan stuff secretly. And I just thought that was interesting because he was willing to give it all up just so he wouldn't get so many people murdered essentially by the king.
Right.
But to me, the specifics don't matter. What matters is that it's all the people accept it or submit to whatever people decide.
Yeah, I think once the quote unquote expedition is underway, I mean, you have to be of a singular mind. So I mean, a lot of this sort of sorting has to be done before the exodus. I mean, there's no point in bringing people of 4 different faiths and expect that to work out, right?
And you can make one Swede community, for example, and then you could have another one that's Danes, and it doesn't matter to me, like, as long as it's all Danes and all Swedes, in terms of thinking.
Right.
And they could even get along, on their own way.
Yeah. Let me see, where were we? Another goal should be to create an order that would make up monasteries. The monks would be a mixture of warrior and priest, and from them a large number of our future leaders will be selected. This is an era of dedication. Oh, sorry.
So this is more like thinking of, there's a lot of men out there that don't have any direction, and this is sort of just to take those, I don't want to call them spare men, because they're not spare. Every person's valuable, right? So you take people that maybe are a little bit lost, and then you give them a purpose.
You make them the royal guard, right?
Yeah, exactly. You give them the purpose that keeps, and they're really the lifeblood of the civilization. There's the economic side, the guys running the businesses, they have a purpose. But you need these other guys. You don't want to waste them. It's a waste. You need them.
You create the optimal, I guess, sort of the pinnacle masculinity in the sense that you remember a couple of weeks ago there was, like, my Twitter was full of, like, people saying, because Twitter was broken and everyone who mentioned someone like Academic Agent got into my feed. There was a bunch of guys who were like, the most masculine thing you can do is, like, change your daughter's diaper, right? These are that's not masculinity, right? I mean, that's just work. It's not action. It's not Evelyn's heroic action. But you breed these guys into being men of heroic action as much as possible, right? Whether that's in study and scholarly work, right, or art or prowess, right, physical prowess. Because the other men who have wives, are going to be busy with that stuff. And they're going to be busy with sort of maintaining the day-to-day. But you need the guys who can step in when there's a crisis, who can be the royal guard, as I said, and sort of carry on the traditions.
And these monks too, they could end up. You could imagine like a guy that's kind of lower on the totem pole. He didn't get a wife when he was. Women weren't interested in him when he was younger. But then you put him through like a program, let's say, that we have, and it basically makes him an absolute beast. He's quoting philosophers, while he's like hammering enemies to death. Like, can you imagine that?
I'm just hearing the Sam Hyde sketch with the, "You're such a physical beast that I'm gonna make you my top guy."
Essentially, yeah. And they would be able to pull. They'd be able to pull. If they can't pull locals, they can pull. Or if they can't pull Swedes, they're going to be able to pull locals.
Or even then, they're going to be living a fulfilling life in terms of, like, having value for society. There's comfort in that station, right?
And I've seen so many guys, because I kind of just walked into it naturally. Like, not that I'm a Chad, but like I just sort of walked into being able to be sociable and have all this stuff I have naturally. And there's a lot of guys that just get completely wasted. Like, and it's such a shame, because there's so much value in a person. And I don't mean that in the liberal gay way. I mean, like, there's so much potential for that.
The potential in a young man, yes.
Yeah. And it's just so many are wasted. It's just such a shame.
Yeah, especially, and I feel especially these days, a lot of men are sort of just left by the wayside, and they don't get picked up by anything. And then, society demeans them for being incels once they, come out on the other side without any purpose or direction.
Oh, and plus society moves on, and then these guys are just left behind.
Yeah.
So we got to bring them along with. We got to drag them kicking and screaming, throw them into the fight club, and just go at it.
I mean, we're getting a bit into fantasy land here, but
yeah.
The concept is solid, I think, to maintain a stable society, and especially considering in this, thought experiment, our numbers are quite small, and so every body counts. as you said, there's a lot of potential in a person.
Exactly, and everyone in such a movement would be like, what do they say? There's a Bible quote. You will have, but it's talking about someone who will have lots of kids, or you'll give birth to nations, so to speak. So even guys that would be wasted nowadays would be maybe they have a purpose, as we've been saying.
It sounds like a scheme to get rid of the incel problem. That's exactly what it is.
Yep. I don't think incels are a problem. I think they're just like being an incel is a problem, but incels themselves aren't. They can be saved. We can save them. Let's just say
we can save them. Yes.
I think that'll be another stream. Actually, I mean, we already have a stream on incels that we went through the incel wiki and we looked at a lot of stuff. But I mean, I ran some polls on Twitter regarding the the MGTOW community, because that's something I've seen popping up again. A lot of this the MGTOW posting and the loser porn and the despair posting of these people. And yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure if they can all be saved. I asked in the poll if
well, I think once you sort of emerge on the other side of inceldom, it's already too late, right?
Yeah.
But a society that has structures and need of young men who can't seem to make it socially, right, will give them purpose, right? And if they get that purpose before it's too late, they don't really become incels in the way that we use the word today, right? They don't become lost men.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a conclusion, but I think we've covered pretty much all of the ideas, I think, in the article here. If anyone have any questions they want to pose to Liquid Swan, as he said, he's open to any criticism, and this is more a piece to get the conversation going, really. Post them in the chat. While we wait, I was bad and I forgot to do it when we started, but my Twitter is linked down below if you want to follow me there. Remember to like, subscribe if you haven't. I see that the YouTube shows me the amount of the percentage of people who aren't subscribed who are watching our videos, and that number has been slowly creeping up. So I think it's about 30% of people watching this right now are not subscribed to the Longhouse, or I mean a walrus, but they should definitely hit the subscribe button. Comment for the comment gods if you have anything you want to say, and and also my article on Praxarchy or on my Substack, which should be linked in the description below, or you can find it on the Praxarchy website as well. Bloody Path, any socials?
Yeah, you follow me on Twitter as usual. I don't know. You've already recommended Praxarchy, and we could, you have a Substack, and Liquid Swan has a Substack as well, so you should check that out. And I think that's it.
Do you have a Twitter or anything you would like to shill, Liquid Swan?
I have a Twitter. It's just at Liquid Swan.
All right.
I have a Substack, as Ludic mentioned. It's in my Twitter, so just check that out. I have a YouTube channel. I have a bunch of D&D streams on there, probably hundreds of hours of content. It was a little rough at the beginning, but it's there. I don't do a lot of curation on it.
Very good. I see in some of the chat channels I'm in the Element spheres, I see there are some people trying to organize a friend, or I guess a D&D session. That would be interesting to see if that gets off the ground. Let's see here. I want to... Never mind. Okay. So we have a couple of questions here. Peregrinus de Flandria says, how do you make your younger generation immune from global homo?
Oh,
I suppose
so
that would be an issue for anyone in that country, right?
Well, I have kids myself. I have 3 children. My oldest is 16. I had her when I was 18. And basically what I've done is, I've just given her an example what a man is supposed to be like. She's my first children from my previous marriage, and I kept custody of them after the separation. And what I've basically done is I've always just put my nose to the grindstone, really worked hard to make sure they had everything they needed. And so what I'm hoping is with my girls is that they will see that as like an example of what they want in a guy. And I also like inoculate them against the global homo propaganda. I always I'll watch things with them, and I'll just dissect it. I'll stop it, and I'll say, "Hey, do you know about this?" And then, based on previous conversations I've had with them, they're able to, they can either tell me what they think, and then I'll talk to them about it. Then I'll say what I think, and then slowly over time they absorb it. You have to spend a lot of time with your children. If you don't spend a lot of time with your children, they will end up like whatever's being fed to them or whoever's talking to them the most. You definitely got to be aware of the teachers, and you definitely want to inoculate them against the teachers. And you can do this just by talking to them, talking to them about truth, about reality. For example, you also often have this thing in schools now where one girl will say they're non-binary, and then all of a sudden all their friend group will do the same thing, or they'll say they're trans. So my daughter has never done this. She's had friends that do this. She's been in friend groups that have almost all of them have become either non-binary or trans, but she's always been a normal girl. She's very nice, very kind. She doesn't criticize people for anything like that. She's just a normal person. But basically, she's normal because I've shown her an example of what normalcy is. And if they think their friends are normal, then they're gonna trend towards that. So you can kind of overcome that just by talking to them about reality.
Yeah, I seem to be of the opinion that if you sort of instill your kids with the correct tools and values, once they face this stuff, they'll react in sort of the appropriate way.
Yeah. And my son,
if you want the reaction to be discussed, I guess you will have to give them the tools to reach that conclusion on their own, but they usually will.
Yeah. And my son, for example, he makes a lot of Swede jokes, and I'm like, oh, you kind of have to get them. If you go too far, you have to get them to hide their power level. So you have to like tell them, hey, you got to hide your power level.
Yeah.
You can't be saying that in public.
Yeah,
Stuff like that. So it goes. You have to realize that you are the minority in the situation.
Yeah.
You have to understand if you show your feathers too much, they will destroy you. So you have to teach your kids that as well.
Yeah, it's rough out there. Coney Current Year says, I think we answered this. Are you aware of the settlement of Orania in South Africa? Yeah, we talked a bit about that. I'm not sure if it warrants going any further into it. Not sure.
I wish them luck in the chaos, for sure.
Yeah, good luck. I like Swan Friend. What does he think of AI? Well, that's kind of a broad statement, but I assume he means sorry, what?
Oh, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think it should be smashed. I'm very nervous about it. I don't see how it could be useful. Well, I definitely see how it could be useful, but I think in the end, like Butlerian jihad all the way.
Yeah, I'm a bit wary. I mean, to be fair, I'm also of the understanding or of the belief that we're nowhere near where a lot of people think we are in terms of the quality and the capability of AI. But I think the sort of the benefits will not be worth the risk if we ever get to the fabled general intelligence, right?
But I think it'll just serve power. And since we're not in power, it's a bad thing. If we're in power,
exactly.
Maybe it's a good thing.
Fair. Nordanon says, the endorsement of clergymen getting married is based, but the monasticism in violation of Two Kingdoms doctrine is not. I feel conflicted about this. Well, there's a lot here to feel conflicted about for everyone, Nordanon. I think Liquid Swan has crafted an article that manages to challenge everyone on the right at some point during reading it. And I myself feel what Burkarl is saying, that it takes a lot for someone to actually leave their ancestral land. Would doing something like this maybe seem more real to people from nearer the center of the empire, like the Anglosphere?
Well, let me go into this a little bit.
It seems like the Anglos feel that, that things are worse than for someone like us in the Nordics.
Well, when I went to England in September, October, and I felt like it was interesting because as I was taking the train through the countryside, everything's curated. Everything's been touched by human hands. It's been touched by human hands for like, I don't know, 1,000 years. In Canada, where I am, you drive through the countryside and it's no one's touched it. There's a highway through there, but there's nothing else. Like, humans have barely touched anything. But England is like, it's like almost every single inch of that land is personal, and I just feel kind of sad because like I've traced my ancestry back to I have half my family came from England, like some from Scotland, and then I have some Swedes and Dutch, and it just made me feel sad that it was just being given away. The family silver's just been like put through the dishwasher, and it's all leaching out, and you got all these other people coming in and just taking over. I hardly saw an Englishman when I was in London.
Yep.
I saw Americans, tourists, but I hardly saw a single Englishman. I saw some French Africans, When I got to Buxton, however, in the sort of the small town, there was English people there, but it just made me feel kind of like, wow, you're giving this all up. I went to Stonehenge and stuff, and when you're at Stonehenge, I was the first one there. It was mostly empty, and you could like feel it. Just felt like so like there was like an energy there,
Yeah, it feels very off being in London and in a lot of the occupied British settlements. I can certainly attest to that. Cody Current Year says this stream was a good alternative to yesterday's terrible cigar stream. Well, thank you, Coney. I'm going to print that out and put it on my wall. I'm going to frame it. That's the only endorsement I ever wanted.
Yeah.
Do you homeschool your children? Asks Nordanon.
If I could. I've tried to put them into Catholic school because it's a preferable alternative to the public school here. But instead, I've like, well, I'm going to save the money, put it into something else, and just you could. It's crazy because like as a father, you have a lot of authority with your children because they inherently trust you, especially if you provided for them for their whole lives. So you can kind of inoculate them against a lot of the global homo stuff is basically, to me, in terms of my kids, it doesn't affect them at all, other than how it affects everybody else. But you can inoculate them really cheaply. You just have to talk with them and spend time with them. I've never had an issue come up. I think a lot of the problem is a lot of parents just kind of put their kids on the devices and never interact with them. And kids are going to want to use the devices. It's inevitable. But you just got to do stuff with them as well.
I assume. I mean, we have to assume that you're willing to put in the work of being an actual father. But you're saying that if you do that, it's not that difficult.
It's the most base thing I think you can do for your kids. Just like inoculate them against the global homo bullshit and teach them about real life. And you gotta make them. You gotta let them suffer a little bit sometimes. You can't be saving them all the time.
Yep.
Let the mom do the kissing the knees, kissing the scrape knees. Let the mom do that.
Yes. Let's see here. Dissident Nomad says solid base for currency is important, but that means having to source and mine the precious metal, not necessarily easy, in my opinion. Well, or you bank it all on like some crypto stuff.
Or buy it.
It's also very risky in a different sense.
Yeah, you can also just buy gold or buy coins that exist and somehow use them. I don't know exactly. That's beyond my scope. It's just an idea. But yeah, hello to Dissident Nomad. Appreciate that guy.
Yeah, we had him on. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? Path.
Yeah, that was 2 weeks ago. That was the petrodollar episode.
Petrodollar, which is so far my favorite episode this year in terms of. I think we got a lot of good knowledge out to the people there.
He's very well researched. I recommend definitely his articles. I've been trying to spread them around as well.
That being said, I'm enjoying this as well. So maybe the spot is under contention now for favorite episode. All right. Coney Current Year again asks, will there be a Christian Nietzschean divide in the settlement, or will it be Christian only? I feel like there's already enough Christian Nietzschean divide anywhere on the right that it's inevitably going to pop up. Probably.
I think to me it doesn't matter as long as everyone is the same.
I think that if, and I don't want to wade in, like blindfolded into some sort of theological debate, but there are those who say that Christianity, the way it was implemented in Europe for a long time, was that synergy between the Nietzschean or the Faustian and the Hebrew ways of the Christians, in the sense that it merged into feudalism. But I can't really speak to it other than I've heard someone argue that. So maybe it's possible to revive some of it. I don't know. The Nietzscheans can have Epstein Island, says Fjellner. The Nietzscheans are too autistic to function in a social setting like a small settler colony. Well, I mean, if we end up in anywhere with like suitable climates, we can put aside like workout equipment for all the Nietzscheans and the Baptists to hang out at the beach. It's fine.
We could also incorporate that into the monastery, right? Just have
yeah. One day a week we lift at the beach. Yeah. Listen to Caribbean rhythms. Let's see. Are we running out of?
I'm guessing the Nietzscheans would go native then.
Maybe. Always avoid capital cities when in Europe. Unicorn Year says that's very much a London feeling. London is a cursed metropole. I do agree.
Well, I also went to Swindon when I was there, and Swindon was a lot more English during the weekends, but during the weekdays, it's like all the English people were working. So,
Yeah. Do we all get in a big boat like the Mayflower, or do we leave in small packs? We're going to build an ark, Peregrinus. That's the...
I was thinking more Viking,
like
Viking longships.
Yeah. That sounds like implementation details, and I don't think we're at that stage.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I think the chat here is slowing down a bit, and we're reaching almost 1.5 hours. Do you have anything else you would like to say, Liquid Swan, before we turn off for tonight?
Oh, I found out. I saw a comment about Sargon of Akkad. I did find the office for the Lotus Eaters, but I didn't go in it because I felt that would be kind of intrusive. It's when I was in Swindon.
You had a pilgrimage to to the...
Yeah, I put some flowers outside.
Yeah.
Burnt a candle,
Very good.
But yeah, no, Swindon was actually not so bad. It was. It sort of just reminds me of like a suburban town, in Canada. But other than that, I'm going to keep writing. I have one that I'm working on right now called the working title is Interregnum. But it needs more work, so I might be another week or two away from finishing. But it's going to be about how I think we're in an interregnum right now, but it's like you can't really recognize it because you're living in it.
Right.
So I'm going to try to it's going to be like a sort of a Spenglerian look at it, I suppose.
Interesting. Well, I'll look forward to that, certainly. I've read a lot of your stuff in Praxarchy, so...
and another thing I want to mention too, the Caesar thing, I was because a lot of times I hear a lot of criticism from the outside saying, oh, the Dissident, right, they're always waiting for a Caesar. I'm like, well, no. The thing of my Caesar article, it wasn't about waiting for a Caesar. It's about there's no waiting for one. It's that you have to author it. You have to like bring it into existence. And you have to, by author, I mean authorized. You have to sort of justify him coming out and doing what he needs to do. So it's not that we're waiting for him. It's that
you have to pave the way, kind of.
Exactly. You have to establish the foundation.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I think all of us should be working on that if we got nothing else to do.
Yeah. If you find yourself with some free time, there's always some paving that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I think with that, we're going to end the episode here. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you for listening. Again, remember to like, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff, and follow us on Twitter if you'd like. and we'll be back next week with more Longhouse goodness. And until then, have a good weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.